Thank you, David. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to Trevor and Amar and the whole team at TMS for another fantastic conference. I want to start with a question. How on earth do you follow all these fantastic presentations? I'm afraid, unlike Dr. Salah, I will not be walking around the stage. But maybe as a confession, I'm a consultant. I started my life as a market analyst, so you will be getting some graphs and supply-demand measures on this presentation. I thought it'd be good to start off just at a very high level, thinking about what the challenge the industry faces is and the tools that it can use to meet that challenge. The bottom chart, I show the IMO's stated decarbonisation trajectory to reach net zero by or around 2050. And really within that context, there are four principal levers that the industry can pull to meet that decarbonisation target. The first one is the operational levers, which in some ways are the easiest. Better route selection, slowing ships down, cutting waiting time at ports. They're in some ways the easiest, but they face major challenges in terms of the agency problem. The fact that the owner often is not the charterer or the operator of the vessel and can't control the speed at which the vessel sails. There are good reasons. We've worked with many of the big Australian mining companies. There are good reasons why they run queues outside ports. So whilst the top left is in some ways the most attractive, it does face significant issues. Energy efficiency technologies. Again, attractive. One of the key messages that I want to try and communicate today is that in our view, if you build a ship today, you should factor in a cost of energy over the course of the lifetime of the ship of 3 times what the current VLSFO price is. That's not just the cost of the fuel, and it might be an alternative fuel, it's also the cost of compliance of burning that fuel. So really, in that context, any payback period on any energy efficiency technology is going to be far shorter than current estimates are suggesting. However, even with some of the best energy efficiency technologies, there's limited capability. You know, we're looking at low double digits, and that's even including some quite ambitious technologies such as air lubrication or wind assistance. In order to meet the longer-term targets the industry has set itself, we really see the 2 right-hand boxes. Replacing fuels, initially drop-in fuels for existing vessels, potentially looking at vessel retrofits, and Lloyd's Register supporting owners already looking at retrofits and assessing the feasibility. We're actually undertaking both LNG and methanol retrofits at the moment. And then on the right-hand side, also looking at the new buildings and the selection of new buildings. Of course, we exist in an uncertain environment, and when we think about new buildings, I don't think we can optimize new buildings for a perfect new building in 2040. I think what you can do is build the least regrets new building in 2040. We don't know what the future will be like, but by anticipating potential pathways of technological change and regulatory change, you can make the decisions that you won't regret by building in levels of redundancy or future planning for potential shifts to alternative fuels, for potentially accommodating fuel cells or batteries instead of the auxiliary generators on the vessels, etc., etc. So I think these are the main levers. Dr. Ibrahim earlier talked about the challenge the industry faces around regulation, and I want to fully recognize that challenge, but also talk about the increasingly clear shape of regulations that we will see. We already saw from the IMO's 2023 greenhouse gas strategy that there will be 2 elements to future regulation. There will be a technical element and an economic element. We know now the technical element will be a global fuel standard. I'll talk about more about what that means in the future, but the technical element will be a global fuel standard. We know that. We just don't know how stringent or ambitious that fuel standard will be. There'll be an economic element. There'll be some form of levy or fee-based system to put a price on greenhouse gas emissions. But in our view, it's really the fuel standard that's going to do the big lifting here. I want to just spend a moment explaining what a fuel standard is, looking at the only existing example of a fuel standard in the maritime industry, which is FuelEU, which will come into force on 1st of January this coming year. The fuel standard, that's FuelEU, takes the 2020 average greenhouse gas intensity of fuel burnt in the EU, and then sets a target of 2% reduction from 2025 to 2030, and then increasing levels of ambition 6%, 14.5%, etc., etc. If the fuel that a vessel burns on average over the course of the year doesn't meet that 2% reduction, penalties are applied. And those penalties are calculated to make it economically optimal to burn clean fuel. You'll spend less money burning a clean fuel than you will paying the penalties. This slide sums up the potential pathways, the left-hand chart being the technical element, the global fuel standard, and potential pathways around the ambition of that fuel standard. The right-hand chart just shows the implementation of a greenhouse gas levy in a bit more detail. This is from a project we did for one of the major liner companies. I think the other point I want to talk about in terms of a fuel standard is that it's quite creative in terms of unlocking the advantages for early movers. One of the challenges that, of course, shipping faces, and that we all in this room know, is that shipping historically has not rewarded first movers. It potentially has rewarded fast followers, but not first movers. I think that FuelEU and potentially the IMO Global Fuel Standard that will come in 2027 will address this through pooling. I mentioned how a vessel over the course of the year has to demonstrate a lower greenhouse gas intensity. In FuelEU, 2% less, 2% lower greenhouse gas intensity. In fact, you can aggregate that across a pool of vessels. So you can, in the case of the FuelEU, have 38 vessels burning conventional fuels, making no change at all and just burning VLSFO, and offsetting those emissions through one single vessel burning burning ammonia or burning an e-fuel. And I think that pooling mechanism creates quite a significant economic incentive to switch fuels to greener fuels. And to us, that's quite exciting as a development. Before closing, I also want to touch briefly on existing vessels. This is some of the work we do with owners of existing vessels, looking at how they can take those vessels through to the end of their economic life rather than their early scrapping. So this example is a vessel owned by a company in the region, trading in the region. This is a 10-year-old VLCC. And we knew that we had when we started this project in 2022, we had a dry docking coming up in 2024. So for the first 2 years of the project, the focus was just on route optimization, installing some software on the vessel to support optimal weather routing, and that allowed that vessel to stay on that downwards curve, that decarbonisation trajectory for the first 2 years. The vessel then went into dry dock. As I mentioned, it was a 10-year-old vessel, so there wasn't scope to spend huge amounts of money on the ship, but we did some optimization around the propeller, around the rudder, and the flow of water at the stern of the vessel that allowed us to continue on that decarbonisation trajectory for another 3 years until 2027. Beyond 2027, the vessel was going to be non-compliant based on our techno-economic modelling. It wasn't worth fitting additional ESDs at that second dry docking of the vessel in 2024. And from then on, the vessel will burn biofuel just to keep it compliant and within that decarbonisation trajectory. So that's a strategy for how you can adapt existing ships through the transition. And then finally, we talk about this at a fleet level. So this was done for a fleet of around 100 ships, looking at the decarbonisation trajectory for that entire fleet, with a mix of new buildings that could be fuel flexible, that could burn, in this case, LNG or methanol as a future fuel. We also looked at the potential for some limited retrofits of diesel engines into methanol as well to support that decarbonisation trajectory, and also increasing use of LNG, bio-LNG, and even looking forward into e-LNG to support the longer-term decarbonisation and the fuel switching that I mentioned. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think we all understand that there's a huge challenge in front of us in terms of decarbonisation. Of course, collaboration, I think, is one key word that we all need to recognise. I think the other is a strategy. We can't optimise our vessels for 2040. We all know that. We can't set the perfect corporate strategy. But I think by setting a plan, by making a vision for how we're going to decarbonise and then undertaking concrete steps to try and unlock that vision and to learn as an industry how we can decarbonise is extremely important. Thank you very much for your time.